There is a paper name card sitting on a table in front of a microphone. A 2-second gesture at the end of a speech. A hand reaches out, picks it up, and turns it face down. Nothing illegal, nothing loud. Just a man who, having finished speaking, apparently prefers that no one in the audience be able to identify who he actually is. The question worth asking is who that man was and what he had done in front of everyone only a few dozen minutes earlier. Cusco, Peru, August 13th and 14th. 2 days of work sessions with representatives of social organizations, indigenous communities, and civic collectives drawn from 9 regions across southern Peru. The title of the gathering is Weaving Voices for Dignity, with a subtitle addressing human rights and the common good. 3 organizations sponsored the event, and the second listed is the most consequential of the 3. The Episcopal Commission for Social Action of the Peruvian Bishops' Conference. There is no ambiguity here about the nature of the gathering. This was not a secular event to which the Church happened to be invited as a courtesy guest. This was a Church-organized event, run under the authority of the National Bishops' Conference itself. The opening session was presided over by Monsignor Lizardo Estrada Herrera, Auxiliary Bishop of Cusco and Secretary General of the Latin American Episcopal Council, CELAM. Also present in the room was Monsignor Miguel Ángel Cadenas, Bishop of Huancayo, and a third man, one who will not appear by name in any official account of the event at all. According to Vatican media's own framing, this gathering was presented specifically as preparation for Leo XIV's upcoming trip to Peru in November, the opening of a meeting convened by an official body of a bishops' conference ordinarily takes place with prayer. This one did not. The video of the opening shows no Catholic prayer, no blessing, no Trinitarian invocation of any kind. None. Instead, a woman leads what is explicitly identified as an Andean ceremony. Her words are worth hearing in full, exactly as spoken. This month of August is very special for us from the Andean perspective. It is the month of Mother Earth, who loves us so much, who is so affectionate, so generous, who gives us food. Coca leaves were distributed to everyone present in the room. Guided breathing exercises followed, conducted with eyes closed. Let's see how our insides are feeling. The same voice continues. This body we inhabit, is a small earth. It is territory. A ground-level altar was arranged with bowls set upon it. Inside those bowls were offerings placed for the earth, including cheese and leaves meant to be laid on the ground itself. 3 ceremonial taps on the leaves preceded each placement. We thank the earth in this important month. We give it 3 taps as we lay them down. A bowl of fire sat at the center, where the leaves were eventually burned, and the ceremony closed with a final address, spoken directly and verbatim, to God, Mother, Grandmother, Fire. At the 51-second mark of the video, the Auxiliary Bishop of Cusco walks forward, holding coca leaves in his own hands, and sets them down as part of the offering. At the 55-second mark, a second man, dressed in jeans and a grey jacket, follows the same path. He sets down his own leaves in exactly the same manner, and the footage shows this clearly and without ambiguity. That man is Monsignor Jordi Bertomeu, a priest and canonist, an official of the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, and the Pontifical Commissioner handling the Sodalitium case, the major and long-running Peruvian abuse and governance scandal this channel has referenced in earlier coverage of the broader crisis of accountability within Latin American Catholicism. This is not a layman who happened to be passing through the event. This is not a junior administrative official attending as a courtesy. This is the specific man the Holy See dispatches to Latin America to handle its most sensitive and consequential cases. The description offered by the newspaper that first published this footage is precise and worth repeating exactly. He lays down the leaves with visible reverence. There is no indication, the same report continues, that he merely attended the ceremony as a passive observer. He participated like every other attendee present in the room. Immediately following the ceremony, the formal speeches of the gathering began, and it was Bartomeu's turn to report directly on the sodalitium case. Throughout his remarks, the camera stays focused on the audience rather than on the speaker himself. And at the very end of his presentation comes the gesture this video opened with, the card bearing his own name, turned face down. That specific moment was filmed in its entirety and remains part of the public record. Vatican media's own report on this gathering is long and detailed. It emphasizes the role of the bishops present and situates the entire event carefully within the broader context of the Pope's upcoming November visit, and that report does not mention the opening ceremony. Not a single line. It does not mention the coca leaves. It does not mention the offering made to the earth. It does not mention that this specific gathering took place during what the ceremony's own leader explicitly called the month of Pachamama. And the fourth and perhaps most telling omission of all, the report never mentions Bartomeu's name at all, despite the fact that he addressed the assembled audience directly, immediately following the ceremony itself. What emerges from placing the footage and the official report side by side is a genuine contrast between what the images themselves document and what the official institutional account chose to say about the same event. And that contrast is, on its own terms, newsworthy, regardless of how one ultimately interprets the ceremony itself. The newspaper that first published the footage attempted to contact Bartomeu directly for comment and explanation. No response was received. Silence there as well. On August 20th, Archbishop Carlo Maria Viganò's reaction arrived across his own channels, and it was, of everything published in response to this footage, by far the harshest. His first point of clarification concerned the actual role played by the two churchmen in that room. Those prelates, he wrote, were not there as distracted spectators, but as active participants. The definition he applies to the ceremony itself leaves no room for interpretive softening. A pagan rite of invocation to the infernal idol of Pachamama. The comparison he draws is to 2019, and specifically to the images from the Amazon Synod that much of the Catholic public still remembers vividly. Images of a wooden Pachamama figure venerated in the Vatican gardens and later inside a church near St. Peter's, an episode this channel has already referenced in earlier coverage of Cardinal Sarah's own remarks on that same underlying controversy. But Vigano argues the roots of what happened in Cusco reach considerably further back than 2019. He gives a specific date. The seed was sown in Assisi on October 27, 1986, he writes. We are seeing the harvest today. That reference is to the Interreligious Day of Prayer for Peace convened by John Paul II, an event that has generated theological controversy and debate for nearly 4 decades over whether and how representatives of different religious traditions should pray in shared physical space, and Vigano situates the Cusco footage as a direct descendant of that specific and long-contested lineage, part of a single continuous trajectory rather than an isolated incident. He identifies what he considers the single most serious element of the entire episode, offered without any qualification or extenuating circumstance attached. An official of the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith and an auxiliary bishop offering coca leaves with visible devotion. The rhetorical question he closes with is severe, and it is reported here exactly as his own words, not as this channel's own characterization. How would the martyrs of the faith judge this apostasy of the clergy? It is worth pausing here to weigh this specific claim carefully, separate from the underlying documentary footage itself, which is independently verifiable and not in dispute. Vigano is not a neutral or disinterested commentator on this story, and that context matters considerably for how his interpretation should be received. As this channel has documented extensively in prior coverage, he has moved into explicitly sedevacantist territory, a position that denies the legitimacy of the current papacy altogether. A stance this channel has consistently distinguished from the Society of St. Pius X's own considerably more measured position, which continues to recognize Leo XIV as Pope and prays for him at every Mass. Vigano's use of the word apostasy here, and his broader framing of this specific incident as part of a coherent, decades-long theological project, rather than as an isolated pastoral misjudgment by two individual churchmen, needs to be read with that background clearly in view. His interpretation is severe, forcefully argued, and grounded in a genuine and internally coherent theological worldview. But it remains one interpretation among several possible ones, not an independently established fact, simply because he happened to be the first and loudest voice to draw wide public attention to the footage. That said, an archbishop, even one operating in his current and contested canonical situation, is not simply an anonymous online commentator, and this distinction matters for understanding why his statement carries the institutional weight it does, regardless of where one lands on his broader ecclesiological positions. What he says, once said publicly and attached to his own name and former office, becomes itself a documented fact requiring some kind of accounting, whether or not the underlying theological framework he applies to that fact is ultimately correct. As of this recording, there has been no response whatsoever from the relevant Vatican offices. No denial that the footage is authentic, no clarification of what actually took place in that room, no formal statement from the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith regarding its own officials' documented participation in a ceremony now circulating publicly under his own name and title. Silence, again. Exactly as this channel has now documented repeatedly across multiple stories this year. From the Umberto Longo appointment to the 4-month gap in the San Antonio Schism case, to Cardinal Roche's own unaddressed contradictions regarding the theology of the Church having supposedly changed. Fairness requires presenting the other available interpretation honestly and in full, because it is not a fabricated excuse invented after the fact to explain away uncomfortable footage, and treating it as though it were would itself be a form of dishonesty toward the viewer. It is a genuine and long-standing theological and missiological concept within Catholic tradition, inculturation. For many Andean Catholics, the specific practice known as the pago a la tierra, the payment to the earth, functions as a gesture of thanksgiving for the harvest, inherited directly from their grandparents across many generations and experienced by them as an expression of cultural and ethnic identity rather than as an act of religious worship directed toward a competing divine being. This distinction between genuine cultural practice compatible with Catholic faith and practice that constitutes actual idolatrous worship incompatible with it is a classical one within Catholic theology, familiar to anyone who has studied the history of Christian missiology across many centuries and many continents. From the early Church's own gradual absorption of certain pre-Christian European festivals into the liturgical calendar to the Jesuit missionary strategies in China and India that generated their own centuries-long controversies over precisely this same underlying question. The Church has always held, at least in principle, that what does not conflict with the Catholic faith within a local culture may be preserved and even integrated, while what does genuinely conflict with it must be removed, purified, or transformed before it can be safely incorporated into Catholic devotional life. The problem critics raise, and it is a genuinely serious problem rather than a merely rhetorical one, deployed simply to score a polemical point, is precisely about where that line actually falls in practice, and who possesses the authority and the theological discernment to draw it correctly in any given specific instance, especially one involving senior Vatican officials acting in an apparently official capacity rather than private laypeople participating quietly in a regional folk custom. Coca leaf offerings, invocations addressed to Pachamama by name, and language explicitly describing the human body itself as a small earth and as territory belonging to that same earth, sit considerably closer to the specific vocabulary of pre-Christian Andean religious cosmology than to a merely cultural expression of gratitude for a good harvest season, in the judgment of critics like Vigano and others who have echoed similar concerns in the days since. Defenders of the practice would respond that centuries of accumulated local Catholic tradition have already folded this specific ceremony into an essentially Catholic framework of thanksgiving, in much the same way the Church has long tolerated and even actively absorbed other regional harvest festivals and seasonal customs across the world without regarding them as compromising the integrity of the faith itself. Both positions have genuine and serious adherents within the Church, including trained theologians and missiologists on each side, and this channel does not claim to resolve definitively which reading is theologically correct in this specific case. What can be said with confidence is that the specific language actually used in the ceremony itself, God, Mother, Grandmother, Fire, addressed together as the direct object of a closing invocation, sits at minimum in a genuinely ambiguous zone that a simple and unexamined appeal to enculturation does not, on its own, automatically and fully resolve. The point that ultimately matters most here, though, and the one this story keeps circling back toward no matter which theological framework one ultimately applies to the ceremony itself, is not actually the contested theological status of the ritual in isolation. It is the specific and cumulative list of things that no one in any official capacity actually said about it, at any point across the entire week following the event. No explanation was offered by the event's organizers, despite the Episcopal Commission for Social Action being one of the 3 official sponsoring bodies. No mention of the ceremony appears anywhere in the official Vatican media report on the gathering, despite that same report running long and detailed on every other aspect of the 2-day meeting. No response was given to the newspaper's specific and direct request for clarification, addressed to Monsignor Bertomeu himself, despite his own visible and documented participation in the opening ritual. A name card, turned face down at the end of a public presentation, ends up communicating more about this entire episode than any official press release actually did, and it remains part of the historical record specifically because that particular gesture happened to be captured on camera, in a moment its own subject very likely did not expect to become the center of international Catholic attention just days later. There is a broader pattern worth placing this story alongside, one this channel has now documented repeatedly across an entire year of ongoing coverage. The gap between what official church communications choose to report publicly and what independently verifiable documentary evidence, video footage, leaked internal documents, photographed conference programs, official bulletins compared against separately circulating primary sources, actually shows, has now surfaced across multiple entirely unrelated stories spanning several different countries and several entirely different areas of church governance. The Umberto Longo appointment, where a Vatican bulletin listed an academic appointment without any accompanying reference to documents already circulating publicly online under the same name. The Fort Worth pastoral letter, which named specific street addresses of Catholic communities while leaving entirely unexplained the 4-month gap between a canonical ruling and its eventual public announcement in the separate but structurally similar San Antonio case, this channel also covered in detail. Cardinal Roche's own repeated public statements asserting a change in the Church's theology since the Council, statements that remain on the public record but that Rome has never directly addressed or clarified, despite years of accumulated controversy surrounding them. And now, an official Vatican media report on a Peruvian gathering that omits, entirely and without any acknowledgement whatsoever, an opening ceremony that its own event cameras recorded in full and that involved, by name and by direct documented action, one of the Holy See's own senior canonical officials. This is not, on its own, proof of any single coordinated institutional cover-up, and this channel remains careful not to claim that it is, since each of these stories involves different offices, different countries, and different individuals with no established connection to one another beyond the pattern itself. What it does represent, taken across this now considerable and growing body of documented cases spanning liturgy, personnel appointments, canonical proceedings, and now interreligious and cultural practice at the highest levels of Vatican diplomacy, is a genuinely recurring institutional pattern worth naming plainly and tracking carefully going forward. Official Vatican and diocesan communications across multiple entirely separate contexts and multiple entirely separate offices operating under different leadership have repeatedly proven considerably less complete than the independently available documentary record, whether that record consists of a leaked Masonic Lodge publication, a diocesan tribunal's own internal timeline later made public, or, in this specific case, unedited video footage of an event the Church's own regional commission organized, funded, and Vatican media itself chose to cover selectively rather than in full. The Pope's own trip to Peru is scheduled for November, roughly 3 months from the date of this recording. Whatever the ultimate and theologically correct judgment on the Cusco ceremony eventually turns out to be, whether it is understood as a genuinely defensible expression of inculturated Catholic gratitude rooted in centuries of Andean Catholic practice, as Vigano's apostasy, or as something genuinely situated between those two poles that neither extreme framing fully captures on its own, the trip itself now arrives carrying this specific and unresolved question directly with it into November. A question that remains unresolved, not primarily because the underlying theological debate is inherently too difficult to adjudicate with careful and honest scholarship, but because no one with the actual institutional authority to answer it clearly, from the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith to Vatican media's own editorial leadership to Monsignor Bertomeu himself, has yet chosen to say anything about it at all, publicly, on the record, in their own name. What do you think? Leave a comment below. Amen. God bless you.